Today, I bring you one of my most unlikely videos ever thought to be created on this channel, one that turns a largely negative into a positive with the onset of Disney sequels. Because while they utterly fail at real, competent sequels, they do have a much more clear path to make something great. Because it's no mistake, about a little over a year ago or over the course of time, I have complained about Disney sequels as a whole not working in general from the stigma of Walt Disney himself never believing in doing any sequels, until decades after his death when they tried, with The Rescuers being the first real time, followed by a period of directed DVDs, and never again until Ralph 2 and Frozen 2 before the current age of Moana 2 we are in. But how I truly believe there is a way forward to make them work, spearheaded by such beloved popularity that the movies had in its past. I mean, sure, I am a massive Disney fan, holding out whatever hope I have for the current company, sadly, that has made many upset decisions across movie and theme parks, but it doesn't hurt to appreciate the pockets of those who work to build what they feel passionate about, because it still clearly exists there today with the cast that they have. Because this is also coming off the information of how big Moana 2 is set to open at the box office, up to $220 million over the 5-day Thanksgiving weekend, a brand new record that brings Disney back to its highs of 2019 with billion-dollar film after billion-dollar film, coming off a widely successful sequel summer with Deadpool and Wolverine, and of course Inside Out 2 that deservedly became the highest grossing animated film of all time, above the 2019 Lion King that people enjoyed. But the difference with that compared to these Disney animation sequels we are talking about today, like Moana 2, is that they were generally enjoyed critically across the board, having competent films where, despite most of Pixar sequels being below par their original counterparts, they are still generally good films, having a fantastic track record starting with Toy Story 2 all the way back in 1999. It gave time to develop such stories that people would want to continue rather than the pointless slop that hardly tells you anything different, just reminding you of the important impact of why you loved such characters. Since the truth we've been talking about for several years at this point is that Walt Disney Animation Studios cannot for the life of them make a really good sequel to any of their stories, once again reminding us of that same curse I kept pushing over time of Walt Disney putting an end to doing any sequels after the less successful Three Little Pigs shorts in the 1930s, wanting to do something different and challenging for animation at the time. Every story for him presented a new challenge and opportunity to explore, and going back to the same thing just stifled that creative process. But here in the modern era with the most successful franchises, we prove something quite different with a plethora of new ideas that can be presented with such realms that can top said original pigs with new pigs, if you get what I mean. But while other studios experience such great success, Disney on the other hand has never shined in that way, regardless if a film was financially successful or not. Hence why I said Walt's statement was a curse on this company, because they don't properly know where to go with said characters. The best they can do is make a series out of it, evident by how Moana 2 is the retooled series as a movie, and how most of the directed DVDs are just scrapped series that didn't work at all. The new sequels that Disney is pushing out to theaters is just turning the page back to the movies like Atlantis Milo's Return and Cinderella 2 that have clear separate stories that are just jumbled and packaged into one film, now released into theaters as a result of their own original failures that people refuse to see. Now, I'm not going to mention them as much as this video because they don't deserve to be after time and time again, but that was obviously Strange World that nobody saw, or Disney not even wanting to promote, being very boring, and Wish on the other hand just generally being a self-referential film that doesn't develop its own identity. And sequels like Moana 2 just come out to restore the negative brand image of their original failures, which evidently works running off the back of the most popular streamed movie in the world judging by its success. But then, this simply does not solve any of their problems because they just want to play it safe now. A quick fix to a bigger issue that needs to be addressed and is not going away anytime soon, when we are just less than a year out from Zootopia 2 and only a few years before Pixar does Toy Story 5 and Frozen 3 and 4 come out. Films that will definitely make a lot of money but do nothing since we already have a past to look back on. I mean, this isn't to say Zootopia 2 does have more hope, since they already have their own short Disney Plus series that has been released and worked on as a movie in the past compared to Moana 2, but who can truly say it can impress in the future when you barely do anything different for what already had been released? Yet I say this because they do have the best template for creating stories that can work to great success, because millions of people across the globe have admired interest for the stories that Disney has done despite every hardship that has come their own way, knowing exactly how to survive, honestly, from the ashes of darkness to a remarkable degree. That looking in Frozen 2, Moana 2, and even Ralph Breaks the Internet to some extent, there is a huge audience that wants to see more and have an interesting worlds larger than life itself that connects people across oceans and icy cold terrains, and how the ideas can transfer into something greater than the original could even offer. Where Moana 2 has evidence of a clear-cut story that logically adds to its character's journey of why they were chosen, breaking the isolation of the seas and then combining it all together to be one. But then how it's a matter of choosing not to at the behest of crunching for said time, looking way back at Frozen 2's own documentary Into the Unknown, with deadlines being the key to why Disney sequels or films in general are failures because they feel obligated to release a movie every single year, which hadn't always been the case when Walt first expanded into live action and Disneyland, having breaks between such animated movies as he got less interested. And thinking about that era, I do wish we could return to that time since it wasn't every other year, but that's not how business works these days that I don't have much knowledge on. Just a simple fan with the opinion of looking back on some baffling mistakes that aren't really the worst, except for a few. Not to say that Disney doesn't do quite bad if you do want to put some of the direct DVDs like Hunchback 2 that only exist for the sake of Quasimodo getting a girlfriend, and up until the point that you have a theatrical film that breaks everything you know about a character into a crybaby man-child. Everything they do here is reactive based rather than creative based, something that has been true since the Renaissance era, in a time when those like Katzenberg tried to capitalize off of what was the most successful for Disney at the time with The Rescuers and The Rescuers Down Under, and taking that back with such new developments animation had, but then taking it away when the film wasn't working enough for audiences, pulling promotion of the film, declaring it dead, and the studio just didn't do any of that for so long, other than of course doing those directed DVDs like Return of Jafar that was successful for that realm without damaging the studio brand as a whole to make money on the cheap. Now, personally, I wouldn't say Rescuers Down Under is in any way a bad film, just a film that wasn't necessary for its time if you wedge it between the great success of Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid. It's decent for what it is, but never far enough for an interested audience the way I see things like these modern ones play out, just like Ralph's own failures for not understanding who or what they were based off on. And this is the part where we can discuss some information of why these films could work if you could see what happened in the past. First, you have an interesting idea that continues and expands one world with the ability to understand more about the developing role of the character and the story that accepts what they learned overall. But the big failure here was that nothing was really understood about any character or any story arc that they had, shoving some of the ideas to the side that were crucial to make it work. They centered it around a concept to make the resolution more justified from the problem they created, with referencing itself to make it more funny. You know, the entire Disney sequence of the film and other brands of the internet that we knew at the time. Yet how we see that not working since most of it has not aged well in the continued course of time and development of technology, where even Twitter is now outdated thanks to Elon Musk. So without a clear conscience of how Wreck-It Ralph worked, regardless of the age of games and arcades that still remain timeless to some degree because the story worked well, it fails to stay relevant to its audience and be enjoyed. And going back to mentioning films like Frozen 2 is something that was generally confusing more than interesting. Its basis again was in the right place, expanding the world to a far greater degree than what Frozen did to discover who Elsa really is and the mystery of Arendelle's powers, but without a clear decisive path to explain why. Again, evident by Into the Unknown documentary of how they scrambled the ideas and couldn't quite work out what should have been done in time, resulting in ideas like Kristoff's proposal subplot that made no sense within the spirit's main plot. The main plot's consequences not mattering at all in the final ending. Like, who is this? What should we know? And where do we go from here? It was something that needed more time to work itself out, ironically, with having such ideas that worked better in the series if you consider Kristoff's own arc and how Anna and Elsa split off once again. The curious case of another Disney film not generally being bad, but more infuriating to what we should expect. No real stakes to compel itself towards, including the other obvious fact of both films starting the no Disney villain trend until recent times, that we go back once again to find ourselves with films that lack purpose to execute its meaning, with that very meaning could work if they were given some odd amount of time to actually develop it. But that doesn't matter nowadays, with Frozen 3 and 4 back in development to continue such a story, splitting it in different parts, which puts into question of how Frozen 2 could have worked beforehand if such parts of Frozen 3 and 4 are going to be worked on. On that side, it seems like they are learning their lesson of what went wrong, something other studios have been doing for the past few years, splitting these films into two because they just have so much to tell but so little time with how runtimes of movies work nowadays. That the bigger such ideas get, the more complicated it gets to resolve compared to the first where it knew what it wanted to be simply with two sisters resolving their differences through love, but how such continuations need more time in the oven to explain what necessarily needs to be done. But these various problems continue to seep back into Moana 2 now more than ever, with its series basis that I will also talk about greatly when the movie gets released on the platform it belonged on in the first place, where no matter how big the movie will end up being, definitely doubling its original profit if you see what Inside Out 2 did compared to its original, it still never resolves the clear issue of its intended design, where make no mistake, just like I reviewed it earlier, and because of my own favoritism franchise-wise, Moana 2 still stands out to be the better idea-based sequel that Disney has released thus far, but considering that it is still Disney, it isn't quite close to being good either. I previously explained that it at least had something to look forward to from its first introduction to the final act, but how you get there is another issue of cutscenes of an episode that confuses the overall focus, acting way too short than what needed to be to accept the next logical step and a rush towards the finish line that doesn't allow anyone to accept what path it takes and how far it's supposed to go. It's safe as can be and hardly wants to connect itself like it was easier for Maui and Moana's journey in the first, with more characters that only a series can justify having in the first place. These sequels create themselves out of bigger world building moments, but only builds it in parts with various unfinished sections that yet to be worked on that creates a lazy final product. It was never meant to be this way when they just dumped this information that Moana 2 was announced earlier in 2024 compared to doing 1 or 2 year announcements in advance for such films that had been in the course of time, leaving no time to really rework this film despite the development that had been put in to upgrade it from a series that just cut out what needed to be done to make it a full-length feature film. And then ending it with teasing off other characters that made it clear it would have had another season to flesh out all the gods or other creatures that it had. So that Moana 2 could have potentially been a great sequel had it been a sequel in the first place of development, which hardly had anything that makes it a big blunder or a good thematic piece in its final product. All this is just a failure of management running the table to take action rather than reaction, to do this rather than needing that. Where now comes the obvious example of what actually worked for Disney to learn from, with Pixar's own Inside Out 2 as mentioned earlier. And earlier this year, most of us online couldn't stop with having a binge on praises of Inside Out 2, not just for its explosive success being the new #1 animated film, but generally being a great film that returned to Pixar's heyday of how Toy Story 2 and 3 were well-regarded sequels. Maybe not to some degree on par like that, but generally well-liked enough that everyone could actually enjoy, that the entire purpose of what people liked about Disney and Pixar could offer returned back to them. These facts begin way back in January 2020 when the director Kelsey Mann started to think about Inside Out based upon his own past, with the mind deciding if you are not good enough, with anxiety taking over and wondering what day would bring to your life, constantly going through these changes. A path that was developed over the course of 4 years from 2020 to 2024 to get it right on its purpose. I mean, to be fair, Inside Out already had a solid idea that can be expanded easily, but that world of ideas has something that can be constructed in a great way if it's done right. As I've said in the past, this is the easiest way to advocate for more sequels for this world when you enter the individual stages of life, with the movie acting as one big event that happens when she moves, others move in her lives, and the wants and needs of a person trying to navigate what their own purpose is, with the emotions guiding their path and needing help on their own. You introduce something that can stand on its own individually, and you can work yourself for great success rather than a vast idea for a small character to discover. We're also thinking about this when Moana 2 focuses on adding new characters. Inside Out 2 does this too, but to a far better, greater degree because they actually have something to do. Each one serves to their own intended strength within the runtime of the film, with ones grouped over here and the others in this section. It's not just there for the sake of being there because they wanted to be included in the series like they usually do, but with a heavy purpose that affects the overall plot. even going so far as to being better than Frozen 2 did, with its mostly original cast being used for that runtime, not utilized properly, and a waste of the new Northuldra and Arendelle guards adding nothing else to offer, demonstrating Disney's lack of know-how. The point being here is that each separate moment is inclusive in the main entire goal that doesn't distract itself for funny subplot shenanigans. It's easy for them to work, but it's a matter if you wanted to in this studio, considering where it started itself from being. This is not to knock down on anyone who actually works on these films. They do a tremendous job with what was crunched or what they have to do, but it's how this management of who's actually in charge just seems like they want to plop the popular idea rather than the actual story that's supposed to develop. But in terms of speaking about all of this and the course of time of what I've done in the past, represents my own growth of accepting where the films can come from. What was once harsh has now turned into something more constructive of the sequel era. Yes, I still believe that most sequel pushing comes out of nothing but money to satisfy the status quo, but it's also how they can be equally as good as the ones that came before if the heart of its idea and story is still present. That even while I have said many times and have seen many times that Disney sequels can't work and still don't even see that to this day, I also can see the opportunity that they can work both in the future and especially in the past with what we know. But will they learn to do so? Is the continued greater question that has yet to exist. More likely on the track record that people have seen being more bad than more good, evident to be expected in its future. So the next time you look back on all of them currently is ones that are great ideas with bad stories. That we have seen movies that can be good, but end up not, staying within the confines of the character, extending their lifespans in the public branded image with nowhere else to go. Unlike the greater examples brought forth by Inside Out that Disney can personally learn for themselves. So to finally end this video off, we learned that sequels for Disney can truly exist on their own, that people have really accepted in their own successes, but how they need to find reason to think that they still can exist, rather than becoming a dust collector memory as most of their other sequels have been for a long time, with a collection of characters we all love and cherish as long as we allow them to, hating where they go but not who they are. A collective of beings who prove their worth to believe in all paths in life are possible, but need reasons to believe that path is worth continuing. For the greater days of its stories are not behind it, but ahead in the lowest of its perilous moments. And I, for one, will still like to see where that journey is headed. I will never stop believing in what it can do, and I will keep doing it until I myself am there. So I'm not all done yet. Excited to see and know what lies beyond. Goodbye.